Hey guys, welcome to the I Hope They Hear This podcast. Today, I'm excited about this because I love it when we have someone on and then there's this kind of other person in that story that doesn't get to share their side of it. And you've come today, Grace Song, everybody, welcome Grace Song, to kind of do that for as a follow up to the episode I did with Joe. Yeah, so thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and as I was thinking about it when I asked you to be on the podcast, I thought of the phrase, "Behind every great man, there's a greater woman." But I don't really like that because it implies that that greater woman is only there to support that great man. But I feel like you kind of have like your own thing going on, and then you were kind of this situation was thrust upon you where you had to take on more than what you were already kind of juggling. And it's I always hear Joe's side, like kind of because it's always like, oh, you were a pastor and now you're a police officer, like
Yeah.
what is that's so fascinating. But I've heard a little bit about kind of what you've had to gone through during that time period, and I want to get the full story today. So yeah, if you could, maybe we can start from the day, maybe even like a few months before when Joe actually came to you and said, "Hey, I'm thinking of leaving the ministry."
Yeah.
Like leading up to it, were there any signs that he was going to do this?
So I know he was getting restless. I know he shared when he came on that he was struggling with vision. And normally he kind of hits that rut or, just struggle every year or every other year. So I was hoping it would just pass. And it wasn't passing. And I think the pandemic just really stress tested that restlessness. And obviously we kind of know what came out of it. So I knew he was struggling with vision and, where does he want to go and take our congregation. And so when he initially brought it up, and I know when he shared on the podcast, it made it sound like, I came around really fast. But when he initially brought up the idea of applying and looking into becoming a Georgia State Trooper, I initially said no. And I don't think he remembered that, but it was just kind of an idea that it sounded like he was flippantly just throwing out there. But yeah, the idea of going into law enforcement, there's a lot of risks and we have a family, there's just a lot that comes with, I think, those responsibilities. And initially I said no. And then he came back and asked again, I think a few weeks later. And this time I realized, oh, he's not just asking, like just, throwing out a crazy idea, but it was he wanted to really get my thoughts. So I remember thinking about it, and I knew it's like a long training program. It's about 8 months, and he'd have to be away for a few months. And, just the idea of that was so, it was a lot. It was really daunting to process. And I think at the end of the day, when I thought about it at that time, I wanted to look back at this moment in time and be able to know that I supported my husband through this season and that I wouldn't have regrets not having supported him through it.
Right.
And so, I was thinking not just months down the line, but like 10 years from now, if we look back and if Joe is still in ministry, wondering what could have been, and I never supported him on this endeavor, I felt like I would have regretted it.
Right.
So that being said, I think it helped me to kind of come around and say, like, at the end of the day, God has his calling over you, and I trust that he will lead you wherever he needs to lead our family and, wherever Joe needs to go. Yeah. So that being said, I think I was able to come around and say, whatever you decide, I will support you.
Wow.
But yeah.
So then it sounds like there were two things, right? When Joe first approached you and said, "Hey, I'm looking into the Georgia State Patrol." Was there a part of you, it sounds like there was a part of you that was sad that he was leaving the ministry, and another part was also sad because he was going into such a dangerous profession, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's take one at a time. So
Sure.
in terms of your like sadness or maybe even disapproval of him leaving the ministry at first, well, even before that, because there are some people who, when they approach their spouse or maybe even girlfriend at the time and say, I'm going into the ministry, there are some people who don't like that even,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So was that something you ever went through, or were you always like, oh, that's great that he's going to be a pastor?
I mean, I think when I met Joe and I started liking him, what drew me to him was how God loved him so much. And you can just see God's favor leading him. And that was even just before we started dating. And that's what drew me to him. And I didn't want to be the person to snuff out, just the desires that God has put in Joe's heart.
Right.
So I knew he was going to go into ministry even before we started dating. And so none of that was kind of a barrier to us dating. But yeah.
And so, I mean, if you guys listen to the When I Grow Up podcast with Grace, like you would know that you yourself have kind of a very successful career, right? So was that something, did the fact that you knew he was always going to be a pastor or in ministry, did that inform kind of your choices that you had to make in your career and things like that? Or was that kind of independent? Because, I mean, to put it bluntly, it's not like pastors make
Yeah.
the most amounts of money,
Right.
you know? Yeah.
So, I mean, even my career pathing, it's something that God opened up and wasn't something that I planned out like 10 years ago and said, this is the course that I'm going to take. Those doors just opened because of God's favor in my life. And through those seasons, Joe supported me too, as, I have supported him. So I think they're kind of independent. It's not because he went into ministry, I was really set on my vocation and my career pathing.
Okay, so it was a very positive experience, him being in ministry. I'm assuming, generally speaking, I'm sure there were a lot of hardships and stuff. So that being a pastor's wife and being able to support your husband in the ministry and all that, I'm sure that was great. So what were your kind of first thoughts when Joe suddenly said, I'm going to leave it? Essentially leave the only career he knew at the time. Right?
Yeah, so I think the decision to go into the academy and start the training, they were kind of two different decisions. So it wasn't, hey, I want to go into law enforcement, therefore I want to step down from ministry.
Right.
And initially, even when he brought up the idea, it was like, maybe I can do both, So I was hoping that he could do both, and it was two different things that we had to process separately. So him going into law enforcement was one thing. I felt like God brought me around to that idea. And then him wanting to transition out of ministry was a whole nother thing. And actually, I think if anything, that was harder to process.
Oh, so you accepting the fact that he's going to go into law enforcement came first?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Wow. So yeah, then kind of walk us through what happens when he drops the hammer. I'm leaving ministry.
So I don't think he dropped any hammer, but it was just a discussion of can he truly do both? And the further along he went through the application process, I think we realized that it was potentially time to wrap up our season at our current ministry. I don't even know when it was that decision was made, but I know there were lots of conversations and lots of prayer, and even just bringing our church community in at the time to kind of talk through the whole process of, Joe's looking into law enforcement, and now we're looking to transition out, and allowing people to be part of that process and dialogue. So yeah, they were definitely two different things, and it was a lot to process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so what was the biggest part what was your biggest struggle in leaving the ministry? Because I'm sure there's the actual work of ministry, but there's also so many relationships that you've built along the way, right? And I actually didn't know this until recently, but I found out that when a pastor steps down from like the leadership position, it's like etiquette for him and his family to leave the church altogether. I did not like. At first, I was like, "What? Why would that need to happen?" Like that was a very surprising revelation for me.
Sure.
But I mean, some people because I mean, at my own church, we've had an exit of my pastor, right? So like I had this discussion with more people because it was a very relevant topic, and I guess it kind of made sense. Like like for the new pastor, like all these kind of things. I heard, I was like, okay, that makes sense. But that must have not made it any easier for you and your family to make that transition out of the church, right? So what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, transitioning out of the church, definitely the hardest part was separating from the relationships, or not so separating, but knowing that the relationships were going to change. And I think, we wanted to really honor the next pastor's family, who at the time we didn't know who it would be, to not... I don't know, have to live in our shadows or, be influenced by our presence. Right. And we wanted to really honor them and bless them with just being able to recreate or reshape or reevaluate the ministry as they would see fit. And, now we look back and we're like, oh, well, it's our friends that are there now, which is great. But again, I know we made the right decision just to honor the new leadership, because we foresaw that there could be conflict or tension, or that there could be different influences if we were to weigh in a certain way. Right. And as lay members, I think the transition would be confusing for like the congregation. So it was a hard decision, but when I look back, I feel like that was God honoring. Yeah.
And how did the congregation take it? Because, it's like, as much as you love them, they love you back.
Right. Yeah. A lot of people had questions on, well, why do you guys need to leave? Can't you guys just stay? But I mean, I think we talked about it at the leadership level too, and agreed that it would be the most beneficial for us to transition out once the new family came in. And even just the timeline of how that worked out was, so the kids and I decided to stay at Hunvision till they found the new pastor. So while Joe went off to the academy and he was gone for 5 months, the kids and I still attended Hunvision. They were still very much our community. And as soon as Joe came back from training and he was home, the following week is when the new pastor's family started. So even the timing of that transition was so perfect, because I still had a community that had my back, that supported me while Joe was away, and I definitely needed them for that season. And then as soon as Joe came back, I felt like it was time for us to leave, and then the new pastor's family started.
So then, let's talk about that season, because we've talked a little bit about it, and I can't imagine. So Joe being away literally meant that he wasn't, like, he was at the training facility even on the weekends, right? So was it like at least the 2-month period where you didn't get to see him at all, or how did that work?
Yeah, so the first month he was away all week and all month. He didn't get to come home. Some nights he didn't even get to call home. So it was like maybe every other night. The first 2 weeks we'd get to hear him call and FaceTime, see his face. And so that month was really, really hard, because we just didn't know when we'd hear from him or see him. And then months 2, 3, 4, and 5, he only came home on the weekends. So Monday through Friday, he was still gone. So I was still very much in single mom mode. just trying to hold it down with the kids.
Yeah. So this might be a very broad and vague question, but
Sure.
how did you do it? Because like you, like I went on a week-long business trip like in March, and I felt so bad to Shirley.
Yeah.
Having to, I mean, because she has a full-time job, she had to watch the kids. You too have a full-time job and you have two kids. But with my situation, we have the benefit of my parents living really close by, but you don't have any family here, right? And you really have just the church community. That's your family.
Yeah.
And like, so like, how did you juggle all of that?
Man, that's it's as much as it's a vague question, it's a loaded question. I know looking back, how did I get through that season? It's just grace of God. I know it was more than what I can handle, but God did bring people alongside me to take care of me, to take care of the kids. I still had work dinners and just other responsibilities that I had to tend to. And whenever I would ask a friend or people in our church, people were very much willing to help babysit, pick up the kids from daycare so I can go to work dinners, or bring meals, or stop by and just hang out. And being an extrovert, I needed people, and our church was definitely there for me. So I know God provided through them, and then even just through our other friends. Even Angie and Chujin, they happened to move in right next door to us,
That's right.
the month before Joe went away. And we look back and we're like, oh, that was God's provision. And then, we'd go over there for dinner every night, and Chujin would cook for us. And just random stories like that where people provided, and they were so generous and so giving.
Yeah. Wow. Still like, I mean, even just the logistics of it, right? Like having to dress your kids in the morning, send them off to school, daycare, whatever it was,
Yeah.
and then go to work and then pick them up. Like, was it like you got into a groove of things, or was it just a struggle until Joe came back?
Yeah. And then on top of it, I don't know if you remember, just outside of the day-to-day, Elizabeth also broke her arm.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh my
that
gosh.
second month where it was October, and Joe had started training end of August. So, he's just started coming home, and then Elizabeth had that injury where she broke her arm. And then a month later, Ezra had to get stitches because he injured his eyebrow at a playground. So it was even more than just the day-to-day things.
Yeah.
There was just a lot of things that had never happened to us. So that there was a ton of chaos. And I know that God provided every step of the way, because outside of the data things, even it was, I don't know, it was a lot.
Yeah. I mean, any tips that you learned during that time period for people going through the same thing?
You have to be ruthless about saying no to things.
Like,
Yeah.
for example?
I had to say, and for me, it was more around work, because I have a lot of work that I always have to do
Yeah.
for my job, and there are times where I just have to say no, but I have an awesome team that also leans in and they support me, and so there'd be times where I'm just like, I can't do this. I need someone else to help me. And so actually that's kind of a two-part thing. Is one is saying no, but the other part is asking for help. I think I was so shameless when it came to asking anyone and everyone for help. It's, hey, I need someone to watch my kids on this day, or hey, like, can you hang out and get dinner with me, or hey, I can't take this meeting, can someone else take it? And just being shameless and asking anyone and everyone for help. I almost felt like people understood too, because of that unique season where it wasn't me just I don't know, playing like a weak card, but everyone understood that, oh, this is a really hard season for Grace, and I want to be there for her. And I realized, even being in ministry, like, you get so used to loving on people and just giving, and and I think what God taught me in that season was love is, it goes two ways, where it's not that you just give, but you also receive. And so in this season of desperation and need, all I could do was receive. And it was so amazing to receive love from those friends or people that we loved on, just throughout the years. And even just talking about it, like, gets me really emotional. But just letting people love on me and loving on our kids, even my coworkers. I usually just try to serve them and love on them. And in this season, I felt like they were all just trying to care for me and check up on me, and have like meals delivered to my house, or like Whole Foods groceries shipped to my house. And it was a season where I felt so loved on by my community and by my friends and coworkers. It was really unique, and even though it was hard, it was really special.
Yeah. Wow. So it wasn't just the church community; it was also like your work community that you were able to leverage.
Yeah.
Leverage sounds weird, but you were able to receive help from, right?
Yes.
Wow. So, I mean, then in your head, as you're kind of going through all of this, do you, and I'm asking this because I think I would be this way. Did you like grow any resentment toward Joe? Because I asked the question because it's one thing to say yes and agree to something, but then when you're going through the thick of it, that's also a totally different thing, right? Like, there might be things you didn't expect to happen.
Yeah.
It might have been harder than you were thinking.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if we're being open.
So I don't mean to defer the resentment to Joe, but for me, knowing that God is always leading our family, and that God is the one ultimately leading Joe too. I didn't feel direct resentment towards Joe, but I did feel resentment to God. There were moments where, I would just ask God why, like, God, this is too hard, or it's too much, or I don't know what I'm doing, there were definitely those moments, and I felt like God's answer back was usually just that He's God, and that I'm not, and I have to trust Him.
Wow. That's really admirable, because I think if I had made a decision to support my wife in something, and like I got to a place where it was like, I didn't sign up for this. I think it would be so easy to just be like, oh, it's like, I resent you, like, I didn't, this isn't what I expected. Like, I need you to, reverse your decision and come back. But wow, it's, And
then I think throughout those hard moments, there were always stories that Joe would share back where I knew God was using him, like even at the academy, where he would have the opportunity to share the gospel with his whole class, where he would be able to answer questions about, like, how do I get to heaven, with these random cadets that just have no personal relationship with Jesus. So in those moments, I felt like God would answer those questions of, there's a greater purpose, that God sent Joe out there for the 99, or, for the one, as opposed to the 99. It was hard to keep that resentment, as long as, I would have those stories of, okay, God, like, if this person comes to faith, like, then it's all worth it. Or if they, if they can hear your word and at some point come to know you, then it's worth it. So I think having that kingdom mentality was what helped me know that there was a greater purpose in all this, and it helped me get through it.
And in that, are you, because trying to phrase this so it's coherent, because in all of that you're playing somewhat of a supportive role, right? Because your mind frame, the way that you're viewing it is, I'm supporting my husband so that he can be out there doing ministry, right? Is that something that was always like a way that you were able to think about your relationship with your husband, or is that something that you had to cultivate? And I asked the question because I think there could be in marital relationships where people are like, I don't want to just play the support role all the time. I want to be the one, kind of like the main character,
Sure.
right? Like, and you very much are in your own right. You have your own career. You're out there doing your own thing, but being kind of almost forced. I don't know if that's the correct term, but almost forced into a supportive role, right? Was that like easy to accept, or was that something you kind of had to like intentionally and consciously like work yourself into doing?
Sure. So I mean, I don't want to go back too far, but I remember in college, I used to be like all about women and leadership and feminism, and I think at some point I had to wrestle with the idea of submission. And to keep it brief, I realized that there is so much power in submission, and it's not a secondary like position. And I realized that through it can change other people. And so I realize even in marriage or in relationships, when a woman decides to be submissive, it's not an act of weakness or just taking on like a side character role, but there's so much power. And I'm sure you've talked to Joe too, where I would almost like to take some credit that because I've been submissive, he's become a better leader. And I ultimately it's me submitting to Jesus and trusting in what God is doing. And so it kind of comes back to, do I think that it's a supportive role, or kind of taking like shotgun, or not being able to drive.
Right.
I've never really seen it quite that way. Ever since just kind of struggling with it in college. And I know that we are where we are today because there are times where I have taken a step back and I let Joe lead. But what's interesting, I think, throughout the course of our marriage too, is that there have also been times where Joe has taken a step back to support me. And I realize the beauty of just that mutual support and submission. It's not just a one-way thing where I give and he receives, but it's a mutual thing where, as a partnership and as a unit, there are times where I've needed more time to focus on my career, and Joe had to spend more time with the kids, picking them up and taking care of them. And I don't know, we joke that he took on that season knowing that this season would come. But yeah, I mean, we believe that it's a partnership, and it's important to support each other and love each other. And sometimes you make sacrifices, and it's not about keeping track of who's supporting who on what, but yeah.
That's so good. That is so good. I really hope that people listening, if they're married or just in relationships, that you can take a moment to appreciate all the times your significant other supported you. Because I can definitely point to many occasions my wife supported me. So, I mean, even this podcast, I think it sounds simple, but it surely does have to sacrifice a lot for me to be able to do this.
Yeah.
An hour a day doesn't sound like much, but having to watch two kids at the same time, like when it's like dinner time or like later, it's not always easy.
Yeah.
My kids kind of go to sleep pretty late,
Yeah.
and they're like the most energetic right before bedtime for some reason. So,
Sure.
Shirley, if you're listening, thank you. And
Thank you, Shirley.
Joe, if you're listening, I hope you can take a moment to appreciate Grace.
He does.
Yeah.
Every day.
Yeah. So, what did it get easier when he came back from the boot camp?
Yes and no.
Mm.
I think when he came back, I had expectations that were much higher. And so while it was great that he was physically present, I felt like that's all he was, and he couldn't provide the mental, emotional support that I was hoping we'd kind of jump right back into. And I remember that first week when he came back home and he started field training, we were just not seeing eye to eye, and I expected him to be more emotionally present with me and the kids, and just felt like he was so stressed and preoccupied. And I remember we were getting breakfast, and I literally had to have a conversation with him, and I said, "Look, I'm so glad you're back home, but I am not going to expect anything from you." I said, this is to protect myself and not to keep feeling disappointed that you're not fully present, and that you're worried about, this season that you're in, and showing up for work and performing. And so, yes, it was easier, but also not.
So I remember you told us this, and there was a phrase, expectation is, what was it? Like premeditated.
Resentment.
That's right. That sounds, so when, as a married couple, like if Shirley told me, I'm not going to expect anything from you, I think initially I'd be like, whoa, like that's harsh.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. It would make me feel a certain way. Like, obviously very bad, but also like, man, like I screwed up really big time, right? But that wasn't the mindset for you, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit?
So, I mean, even just the course of our relationship between Joe and I, we've always been like, our advice to people is set the bar low. Like, if you set the bar low, then you won't be disappointed. And it sounds really pessimistic, but I remember talking to my counselor about it, and he said that's not an unhealthy thing, and that's where I learned about the definition of expectation is premeditated resentment. And I was like, oh, so that means I'm just not letting myself have build up this resentment. And we've always been open about communication and sharing, hey, like, this is what I expected, but, this isn't what happened, what the reality was. And we talk through it. And I think just over the years, we realized that it's not fair to expect something without communicating things. And so even in this season of transitioning and having Joe back home, where I was able to tell him that, it was more like, I am giving you a break. Like you get a pass, in this season of, if you're not present, you're not engaged, it's okay, because I'm not gonna like fault you for it. And I know Joe appreciated it, and then just throughout the course of time, I think he was able to kind of adjust with training and slowly be more engaged. But then it was more of a welcomed, pleasant surprise, as opposed to, you're not performing at a level that I expect you to, and I feel constantly disappointed.
And I think that is part of what makes you Superwoman, is you had two options. When Joe came back, you would either take the path of, you need to pick up the slack, or, you know what, since you're kind of going through this big transition, and Joe told me a little bit about field training, like that first few months, how difficult it was. You recognize that and you say, you know what, I'll let you I'll give you a pass.
Yeah.
Right. And, set the bar so low, not because I don't think you're capable, but because I'm trying to like support you.
Yes.
I think that is amazing. I honestly think that takes a special type of person to be able to do that, But it's like, it's such good advice for married couples to not think of setting the bar low as kind of a failed thing in a
Right.
relationship, to say like, oh, my husband or wife is useless, so I have to put the bar this low.
Right.
It's more of, I'm gonna show you grace.
Yes.
I'm gonna not expect things that is in my mind but I haven't spoken. You know, like all these kind of things. Like, it's such good advice. And so Joe, Chujin, and I, like, we meet up at Starbucks like once a week or so, early in the morning, and like we talk about these things, like,
Yeah.
just like accountability, but we do talk about like our like marriages and things like that. And as a joke, like, Joe was like, yeah, the secret to marriage is just set the bar so low that it's like touching the ground. Like, there's no way you can go underneath it, so because it's so low, right? But as he was saying that, he got a little bit more serious, and he was like, but yeah, seriously though, it's not just that. Like, you have to have an open line of communication.
Yeah.
Like, you have to be very open, because no matter how low you set the bar, if you're not communicating,
Yeah.
and you're harboring resentment when things happen, and like, it somehow your spouse's performance goes under that low bar, that's still gonna build resentment.
Sure.
And it's gonna fester.
Of
So
course.
and he was saying the real secret, and guys, this is, I think, just a real golden nugget of advice here, is to not expect anything, but also openly communicate all the things that you're going through. Don't let things kind of fester and
Yeah.
sit there. So that, I think, I was secretly trying to get the secret of how you survived that season.
Sure.
I feel like that might be the answer,
It might be.
right? Would you agree? Like, without, if you had these set expectations for Joe and you clung to them, would it have been as smooth? I don't want to call it smooth sailing.
Yeah.
But would it have been as smooth as it was?
No, I mean, I would have been filled with resentment, filled with bitterness. But yeah, I think just letting go of my expectations and surrendering it and just trusting in the Lord, that's probably definitely been the key.
Wow. So, since Joe isn't here, and who knows if he'll listen,
He will. I'll make him.
I want to ask you, like, what were the top 5 worst, maybe hardest things? And to balance it out, what were the top 5, like, kind of surprising fruits that you saw during the season?
Oh, that's
It doesn't have to be 5.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know if I can list out 5. I didn't come prepared, so
Yeah, sorry.
no, you're good. I mean, I think I kind of mentioned 2 of the worst moments where, Elizabeth and Ezra both getting injured while Joe was away. There was also another hard moment right around Christmas where the kids and I got COVID, and Joe couldn't come into the house for New Year's Eve. I remember Ezra was homesick, and then I got it. And that Friday, I took a test, and it came out positive. And I remember I called Joe, and he's like, I'm getting off the highway. I'm 5 minutes from home. And he was coming home for New Year's Eve. And I told him, well, you can't come into the house, because he couldn't risk contracting it, because then he would not be able to go and train, and it would set him back potentially. So he stayed in the shed Christmas or New Year's Eve and New Year's. We had to social distance, and he brought food and groceries, and while the kids and I stayed home. So that was also really tough, not being able to bring in the new year together.
Wait, he like literally slept in the shed?
He did, yeah. We had
my
an
gosh.
inflatable mattress and a heater in there already. So he slept in there, and he was just on standby that weekend to make sure we were taken care of, even from a distance. But that was really hard. Knowing that, like, other people were like celebrating 2021 and looking forward to the new year and talking about like, oh, this year was great. And, this is what I'm looking forward to. And I remember like even just reading these things that like different people were sharing, and I felt so discouraged. I was like, I haven't accomplished anything this year. I'm not looking forward to anything next year. You know, I was like, I just want to be, you know, over this season.
Yeah.
So that's probably really hard part of the season. Another one was transitioning out of, you know, Han Vision community. That was really, really hard. But I felt like God gave me grace in giving me those additional months to go even while Joe was away. I don't know if there's a number 5, but those are kind of the main ones that come to mind. And then I guess pleasant surprises. Oh man, I don't know. This season was just hard.
Yeah, no, if there aren't any,
I mean, I think it's all I know when I look back is, wow, God's hand was truly over this season. And I think more of the highlights were probably those stories that Joe would share with me where he was able to share God's word or pray for his class or, you know, pray for someone on the side of the street. So I think those were like the small victories. And I'm sure we'll have more highlights to come, but I think we're still just in this constant season of transition where I'm waiting for things to stabilize and to realize some of the fruits.
Oh, so you're still kind of, the dust hasn't settled yet,
I feel
right?
like it's just now going to start settling because Joe started working, you know, more officially about a week ago. So now I'm like, okay, I think the dust will start settling. But, you know, we're still trying to transition into a church community. And there's just things that I feel like aren't fully transitioned. And so we're just, I'm still waiting,
Yeah.
I guess.
How easy is it for a pastor to find a pastor and his family to find a church community as lay people?
I don't know. I haven't figured out the answer to that. I don't know the answer. How I think we miss the Korean American community. But at the same time it feels like it might be too soon to jump into one. And I know, you know, right now we're just kind of hopping around between other big predominantly white churches, and it's easy to get lost there.
Right.
And it's not like they have social settings where you can have lunch afterwards like they do at Korean churches.
Right.
So it's really hard to get plugged in and find friends and that social circle. But I think that's not just a pastor's transition like problem. It might just be, you know, a broader Korean American background. And yeah, I don't know. It's hard. That's my answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How has it been for your kids? Because, I mean, as much as your Han Vision community was your family, I'm sure it was family for your kids as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, my kids still want to go back. They ask. Yeah, they miss their friends. But we just try to talk through it with them each time they miss, you know, our church community or they miss people. We try our best to address their emotions and listen to them, but also kind of tell them this is our season of change. And you know, we might be hopping around from different church communities and kind of like it is what it is, you know, but we're all together and we'll figure it out. And you know, I try to be good about scheduling play dates with, you know, our friends and making sure that they get to see them frequent enough. And yeah, I mean, our kids have been they've been very good in this season. Yeah, it's like God knew I can handle so much.
Yeah.
So they've been understanding, and you know, when we explain things, surprisingly enough, they're just like, okay, and they accept it. sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So the support wasn't just you; it's also from your kids.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. So looking back, I know you said that the dust hasn't settled yet, but looking back, if are there things that throughout this transition period that you would do different, or do you think it went as well as it could?
I believe it went as well as it could. Yeah. Because again, a lot of it was outside of me, and it was just God's provision every day, every week, every month, every just moment. So, yeah, I wouldn't do anything differently.
Yeah. So I mean, hearing what you went through, it sounds like kind of the key things was for you to be willing to say no to certain things and to be willing to ask people for help. And that's on kind of the survival side of the
Yeah,
season.
right.
But in terms of the relationship with your husband, it was not expecting anything.
Yeah.
And that still sounds bad when I say
does.
it, but it's not. It doesn't have any negative connotation.
Right.
And also having an open line of communication to make sure that there's nothing that you guys are kind of harboring.
Right.
Wow, I'm learning a lot, just as a husband and as a father. I feel like, I mean, we haven't had kind of these major transitional events in my family yet. So, but if it ever were to happen, I feel like I have things in my tool set to kind of weather them as best as possible.
Great.
Because it is, I think, I don't know if it's unique to Korean Americans, but a trait that most Korean Americans do share is the unwillingness to ask for help.
Yeah.
I think there is a little bit of pride.
Yes.
There's also a little bit of I don't want to be a burden.
Right.
But it's like hard to support your church community because no one's really saying that they're going through anything
Yeah.
difficult.
Right.
Yeah. But to be able to just raise your hand and say, hey, like, yeah, like one thing Shirley and I we've still never done is, hey, can you just come over and watch the kids while we like take a nap or something?
Really?
Which is something that
All right, we'll do
every
it.
parent needs.
Yes.
You know, there are days where like I'll fall asleep with Kaden on my chest, and I'll wake up to the sound of like Aisley like breaking something or like something happening. And like, oh, I can't believe I fell asleep. You know.
Yeah.
So I think it's something in us that I don't know, like we
It's
need
our
to
pride,
correct.
yeah.
Yeah. It must be right.
Yeah.
Pride or
Yeah. Or it's like this shame culture where like you feel like if you need to ask for help, it's because you're not performing at a certain level or you're not equipped enough. But yeah, you gotta ask for help.
Yeah. And yeah, I think it's something that we should all look to work on. So, and just to kind of wrap things up, looking forward, are there things that you want to see happen? Maybe like Joe, you're not allowed to do anything crazy like this for the next 15 years, or like in terms of like church communities that you're looking for. Like, if there's an ideal picture of where your family goes from here, like what would it look like?
Man, that is a hard question. I think I'm still so focused on day-to-day survival that I'm not sure what that ideal picture looks like. And again, maybe I'm setting my expectation really low and I'd rather be pleasantly surprised by where we end up. But yeah, I mean, if anything, we definitely want to find a church community that Joe and I can, grow together with, to have accountability, that our friends or our children would find friends and that they would sense that type of community as well. And yeah, I want Joe to feel comfortable in the line of work that he's doing and start feeling, just a sense of confidence in knowing what he's doing. And with any new job, it takes about a year to get there, I think. So kind of looking forward to that. And then I don't know. I haven't even thought about what I want for myself other than just that community piece. But just looking forward to the dust settling and feeling a sense of stability and routine again, which I think is slowly coming. Yeah.
And I want to encourage you, just because I feel like we framed it like, oh, the hard part's over now, and now the easy, like smooth sailing is like I don't want that to
Yeah.
deter you from continuing to like ask for help and
Yeah.
raising your hand. So yeah, even me and Shirley, if you need anything from
For
us,
sure.
please let us know.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one thing that I've learned in this past season is to ask for help. And it's still something that I do very much need. You know, there are some nights where Joe has a night shift and he's gone, and then I just start calling people up to be like, "Hey, let's hang out, let's go get dinner, or can someone watch my kids?" So, yes, I will add you to that list
Yeah.
and take you up on that.
Yeah, yeah. And now that my kids are a little bit older,
Yeah.
like AZ can like play with other kids now.
Yes.
So that'll be good for us too. Last question.
Yeah.
So with Joe, I feel like you can take a pastor out of ministry, but you can't really take the ministry out of a pastor. I say that because even with the meeting that Joe, Chujin, and I have, I think there's a part of Joe that like doesn't want to stop ministering to people.
Of course.
And I feel like that's like one of the outlets that he has for that. And like you as a pastor's wife, you've had like your own kind of ministry in your own right
Yeah.
at church. Do you have that itch as well? And like, do you have an outlet for that? Or is that something maybe once the dust settles more that
Yeah.
you'll kind of look into?
Well, I think Joe and I both believe that, you know, ministry is just a constant thing. It's part of all of our relationships with people and being intentional and loving them and loving God and loving them. And so for me, I know workplace is a big place of ministry for me, and I try to love on my coworkers and serve them. And sometimes, you know, I make sacrifices or I go out of my way to love on them. And I think same thing applies for just my friendships and other relationships. And there are people that, you know, ask me to mentor them because of where I am in my career. So even through those mentorships, I kind of, you know, weave in like, hey, like God loves you and I love you and, you know, I'm here for you kind of thing. And so I think the outlet is consistently there. It's those relationships that have remained intact through, you know, just throughout the seasons. And yeah, not waiting for the dust to settle to minister to people, but just trying to find any opportunity to love people wherever God gives me a heart to do so.
That's awesome. Oh, so good to hear. As we close out, any kind of last thoughts that you had, any musings that you have based on being able to kind of think back to this season?
I mean, I think everything just comes back down to loving God and loving others. And it sounds so simple, but I don't know. I just want to encourage myself and other people. That's all it takes. And if we're doing that every day, then I think the rest God provides. And that's kind of a summary of this season for me. And I'm sure the seasons to come. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, like I said in the beginning, actually, I don't know if I mentioned this on the recording or not, but I really wanted this episode to be a celebration of kind of what you sacrificed and did for Joe. Because if Joe had a lesser wife, who knows? He might not have made it through basic training, right?
You're right.
He might, yeah.
Probably.
Right? So like we see Joe and it's so easy to say, oh, like he went through all that and he made it out and he's a police officer now. And then completely forget the fact that if he didn't have the support system that you provided, that he might not have succeeded. And in all likelihood, he probably would not have succeeded in that, right?
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of what Joe does is thanks to the support that you give him.
Yep.
He's such a free spirit, kind of like just do as the wind blows kind of guy, or do as the Holy Spirit leads kind of guy.
Sure.
That a lot of the administrative stuff, like you kind of have to pick up slack on. And I've seen that, you know, like ever since we met pretty much, because we met through Servants Network. And so, yeah, and like everything he did, I feel like you're always there, like really supporting and like really, yeah, like you're always there. And so I want to say that's awesome.
Thank you.
I wanted to share my adoration for that kind of support. And I wanted this to be able to encourage everyone out there who's listening who might be supporting their spouse or who might be entering a season where they need to support. Because, yeah, it's so easy to write it off as this kind of side character thing. But no, like supporting people who support their spouses is so immensely vital to
Yes.
whatever your spouse is doing. So
Yep.
I think, yeah, today, again, listeners, if you have a spouse who is supporting you in something that you're doing, please take a moment, go tell them I love you. Or if you are the one supporting, maybe have a conversation and say, hey, like, none of this would be happening if it weren't for me.
That's right.
Yeah. So yeah, again, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.
I know we have food waiting downstairs.
Yes.
I don't know if our family has already eaten or not, but we're gonna go eat. So thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk to you guys next time.
Thank you.